Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and we are in this new era here in A Healthy Curiosity where I am being far more selective of the guests that I am inviting on the show and really just trying to curate the conversations that I think are the most interesting ones to be having. So when someone that I hang out with online, run in the same circles with, publishes a paper in a prestigious medical journal that advances the conversation about women's health forward, my ears perk up and I make room on my calendar to record a conversation. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Felice Gersh about women's hormones and the role that they play throughout our lives, way beyond simply our reproductive systems or the typical symptoms that we think about when we think about hormone imbalance. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope you do as well. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm so glad that you've tuned in today. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and with me today is Felice Gersh, who is a medical doctor, an award-winning physician with dual board certifications in OBGYN and integrative medicine. She is the founder and director of the Integrative Medical Group of Irvine, a comprehensive women's healthcare practice. She taught obstetrics and gynecology at Keck USC School of Medicine for 12 years as an assistant clinical professor, and now serves as an affiliate faculty member at the Fellowship in Integrative Medicine through the University of Arizona School of Medicine. She is the best-selling author of PCOS, SOS, and has published several articles in peer-reviewed medical journals, including a recent article in the British medical journal Heart. She has also appeared in several films and documentaries, including The Real Skinny on Fat with Montel Williams and Fasting with Walter Longo. Felice Gersh, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, I'm excited to be here as well.
What can you tell us about hormones? Just kidding. That's way too big a question. But I would love, I know that one of the things that you are passionate about is helping women navigate life in an optimal way. And so I'd love to hear about, first of all, like the roles that hormones play in women's health and why we need to care about that and pay attention.
Well, once you recognize what hormones are, they're really a messenger system within the body. So it's how we communicate. And so think of a body where you have mixed messages or no messages being delivered to cells. How the heck is the cell going to know what to do? What proteins should it make? In what order? What process should be undergone by that cell if it gets no information? So hormones are really messengers. And so it's so critical that we have it. It's like having your voice heard. So women's main hormones that differ from males is our so-called sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And they are critically balanced in a healthy woman. And when they become imbalanced, basically every organ system in the body will become imbalanced and not function optimally. So of course, we want the communication system to be optimally working so that every cell and every organ system can be working together with beautiful harmony to create a healthy body.
Just to probe that a little deeper, when you're talking about women's hormones like estrogen and progesterone, they're not just for the reproductive system. their effects go way beyond that. I'd love for you to spell that out for us, because I know a lot of people think about, like, obviously with the period, that the estrogen and progesterone halves of the cycle, and certainly a lot of women are intimately familiar with their own menstrual cycles and with menopausal symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats and insomnia, things that I treat all the time with Chinese herbs and acupuncture and lifestyle and diet changes. But what people may be less clear on the role of these hormones in the rest of the body.
Well, it's very easy to really put it all together in your mind when you recognize that nature evolved females so that they would be reproductively successful. After all, reproduction is the prime directive of life, of every life form, is to create new little life forms to replace those existing life forms. That's just sort of like the prime directive. And so sex hormones are not just about reproduction. They're about creating and maintaining a healthy body for successful reproduction to occur within. That means, of course, you need a healthy cardiovascular system and neurological system and gastrointestinal system, musculoskeletal system. Every system in the body has to be functioning optimally in order for the female to be successful with reproduction, because a woman would get pregnant and then she would be so unhealthy that the fetus would die and then she would die. And not only that, you have to be able to not just get through the pregnancy, you have to be around to nurse the baby, to raise the child to reproductive maturity. And this has to happen a few times in order for humans to be replaced and for the survival of the entire race of the human species. So the female body is designed with these hormones like estrogen, progesterone, to not just work on the menstrual cycle and reproduction, but to sustain every function in the body. And it's so great that you brought this up, because I'm an OBGYN. You'd think I would have been taught this when I was training, but I was not. I didn't even know that estrogen was involved in all the functions of every organ. I just thought, like you were mentioning, well, it's about having cycles and we need to have it in order to build up our uterine lining, and we need it to sustain pregnancies and all of that. But I didn't know that, well, you need it to have a healthy functioning heart and your brain and, like your bones. Everyone kind of a little bit knows about bones. Like somehow there's this exceptional organ, the bones that need estrogen. But of course it's bones, but it's muscle, it's the vascular system. Like every single organ in the body has receptors for estrogen, and not even just estrogen and progesterone, but even there are receptors that are called estrogen-related receptors, where what binds to the receptor isn't even estrogen, it's something else that we haven't even figured out yet. But in order for that to even work, you actually need to have estrogen on the scene. And even estrogen metabolites are so critical. And there are even receptors, for example, in the heart for estrogen metabolites. So it's just amazing how important these hormones are for the whole body to be working together. And it's so obvious when you think about it. Why would it be that reproduction is like a tacked on system? Like, oh, well, you can just cut it off, take it or leave it. No, reproduction is the prime directive. So every system in the body works together to maintain the health of the whole female so that she can be reproductively successful. And that's what links into that we can chat about what happens when reproduction exits the scene, along with the production of hormones from the ovaries. And that, of course, leads into the whole state of menopause. And what does that mean? Besides losing fertility, what else do you lose? Well, it turns out that there's a lot that changes and needs to be supported in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I'd love to dive deeper into that. Perhaps starting with the heart, is what you just mentioned, estrogen metabolites. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, it's so amazing. So it turns out that, well, the heart has a lot of mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the little organelles that produce energy and are involved in fat metabolism so that you have energy. The heart just needs to keep beating. It doesn't get to sleep. It doesn't get to rest. It has to keep going, even though it may slow down at night, your heartbeat will slow. You're still working really hard to pump all the blood around your body. So it turns out that the mitochondria actually, in order to function properly, not only need to have estradiol. So estradiol is the dominant estrogen produced by the ovaries. And there are other forms of estrogen that are sometimes mistaken because they get all lumped together. But it turns out that estradiol, which has receptor functionality in terms of all the different receptors for estrogen, and that's where the mitochondria come in. It likes estradiol, and not just estradiol in order for them to make energy, which the heart needs so desperately, but also some of the estrogen metabolites. So estrogen, of course, gets metabolized and it goes through the different phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and of the whole system of breaking it down into metabolites, byproducts that are, alterations of estrogen that are produced through the small intestine and the liver, and even in the gut, lower down in the colon as well. There's the whole slew of microbes that are designed in creating estrogen metabolites and even recycling estrogen through enzymes like beta-glucuronidase to try to put estrogen back into the circulation because it's so important. So some of these metabolites actually have specific receptors involved in the heart muscle itself, the myocardial cells, and also the mitochondria to actually help the heart to make and sustain all of its energy production. So it's like totally fascinating. And we now know that women, when they go into menopause, have a different look if you do echocardiograms in terms of what happens when they don't have enough estrogen. And it's quite different from in males. And I've seen so many reports from cardiologists, and they ignore this finding, or they say, well, it's just normal. Well, it is typical because it's part of what happens to the female heart when it doesn't have enough estrogen and the estrogen metabolites. And it's like a stiffer heart, and a stiffer heart is a weaker heart. It doesn't have enough energy. And it's seen that the heart doesn't relax well. So we know that the heart does two things. It contracts, and that's pumping, and then it relaxes, and that's when it refills the chambers with blood. Well, all the focus has always been on the contracting part, which is the part that males will have problems with. And so when that doesn't work right, the heart doesn't pump out the blood, and then that's called heart failure. It's really systolic heart failure, but it's called generally heart failure. Well, in females, because they lose all of that estrogen when they stop having ovarian function, their heart actually becomes really deficient in the ability to create energy. And it manifests initially as a problem with the relaxing phase, not the contracting phase, but the relaxing phase or the filling phase, which is also known as the diastolic phase. That's when blood pressure is lower. The blood pressure has the upper number systolic and the lower number diastolic. The lower number diastolic is also reflective of when the heart is relaxing. And you can actually see that on an echocardiogram, an ultrasound of the heart showing its action, that the heart is actually stiffer when it's relaxing and filling. And that's called mild diastolic dysfunction. That's an early sign that the heart doesn't make enough energy. And it's totally ignored by most cardiologists, but it's really a warning sign. This woman is showing the effects of estrogen deficiency. So that's why the heart just loves estrogen and all the different aspects of estrogen, even its metabolites.
I love knowing that. I remember learning that the uterus and the heart are a similar kind of tissue in the body, and that makes some sense to me. That there would be a similar kind of that contracting, the yang function, but the relaxing, the allowing, the filling back, that is that yin function, and that we clearly need both, like in order to be functional, and that the function of mitochondria primarily is providing energy at a cellular level, correct?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I just have to throw in one thing about
Yeah.
the uterus, that because, I love when it's recognized, the interlinking and the similarities of the different organ systems. And for example, it's not even recognized by most doctors that all of the different enzyme systems that people and cardiologists, for example, recognized involved in vascular health and vascular function, all of those are replicated in the reproductive organs. Like all of the enzyme systems and all of the peptides and all of the fatty acid signaling agents, they're all throughout the body, and they're all essential as well in the reproductive organs. And in terms of the uterus, there's actually now data that if you remove a younger woman's uterus, her brain knows that, and it actually makes her feel sad, and it actually affects brain function when you remove the uterus. So the feedback systems in the body are so complex, and we are barely scratching the surface on understanding how the different organs really communicate with each other. And the uterus actually makes estrogen. So many people don't realize that many organs actually make estrogen. It's so important. And that's how men should love estrogen as much as women do. They make most of it from their testosterone, and they make it on site in what's called paracrine. So when you have a hormone that's produced elsewhere and then it travels through the blood to a different organs for its functionality, for its where it's going to do something, that's called endocrine. When it's produced in the very same organ that it's utilized in, that's called paracrine. And estrogen is so critically important that many, many organs in the body make estrogen directly, and then it's used in that organ. And that's how men get so much estrogen. But the problem is that women don't obviously make anywhere near the amount of the precursor, which is testosterone. So after their ovaries cease making estrogen, they cannot make up the difference from the little bits of testosterone that they have circulating around.
I love your humility around the fact that we don't know it all yet as humans, right? That there's still mysteries in the body to be discovered. And I think it's rare for a medical doctor to come at the body with a, we don't have all the answers yet approach. So thank you for that.
Gosh. Well, and I use my lack of knowledge in terms of how I also, try to address issues. So I take sort of a larger, view. Like I don't know how to micromanage every cell. I can't do it. I can't like give peptides so that I can actually give little signaling agents to each cell at just the right time. So I'm more into like the big view, like give the body the foundational things and then let it micromanage itself, because it's way beyond my capability.
Oh yeah, that's so true. And what you said earlier about the role of the gut, right? The small intestine and the microbes in manufacturing hormones for us. It's like it really speaks to that interconnectivity where like, is it a hormone issue or a gut issue? Yes. Right. Yeah. It's like that for a lot of people, it's a yes and situation. We can't ignore our ability to digest food, as we're thinking about like holistic health. And so I think that's just, I see especially a lot of like mixed patterns where people have gut issues and hormonal issues, mood issues, menstrual issues, menopausal issues, whatever it is. And it's so, the basic stuff like, oh, you know what? Relaxing before you eat, like just putting the body in a parasympathetic state, chewing your food, eating whole foods that the body understands, cooking your vegetables, a lot of, taking out of the diet things that are kind of gunking up the works, so to speak, are just like basics that we might not necessarily think, well, what's this doing to my estrogen or what's this doing to my testosterone? But well, it's actually helping out the organs and and your internal microbiota to make the stuff you need. And like maybe it's not like a linear like X leads to B, leads to Y, but it's like but it's a super simple thing to adopt.
Oh my gosh, we could just talk forever about exactly those things and the role of the gut microbiome and all the microbiomes of the body. Of course, there's always the focus on the biggest one of the body, but I'm talking more and more about the vaginal microbiome, the mouth microbiome, the cervical microbiome. We now know that there's a microbiome of the placenta, and that when women have like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and they've actually checked it now that the microbiome of the placenta is dysbiotic. It's off. And, so I worry there's so many pregnancy related complications. It's like astronomically rising. They're advertising on television now that women should be watched so that they don't develop serious complications and get overlooked. I mean, these are like public service announcements now I see on television. And it's really scary because we have done so much to harm all of the microbiomes in the body, including the vaginal, the cervical, the intrauterine. They've actually done studies now showing, and of course, you don't know chicken egg kind of thing, which came first and so on. But when women develop ovarian cancer, they have a different ovarian microbiome. So it's like, oh my goodness, like we just have to think foundationally, like what are we putting into this cavity or this organ? And what does this mean for the long haul? I mean, we're giving 13-year-olds birth control pills, which we know alter every microbiome. Like, what are we setting this young woman up for 20 years, not even like 2 years, but, like the short term and the long term? What are we doing when we're starting to mess with these foundational systems of the body that have not been paid any attention to, like the microbiomes? And we know that like women who go on birth control pills, the longer they're on, the greater the risk of cervical cancer. And it's like, this is kind of weird. We're giving women vaccines to try to prevent cervical cancer. At the same time, we're giving them oral contraceptives that increase. And this is like through the World Health Organization. This is like mainstream stuff that you're increasing their risk of cervical cancer. And I can tell you that no one's getting informed consent,
and there's so many side effects that are never even presented, like depression being close to my heart, because that's what I was dealing with and what I see in a lot of my younger patients. I feel like there was a really good opportunity to segue into hormone replacement therapy versus hormones that are almost like the hormones that we make naturally, because birth control pills, they in a sense mimic pregnancy, or that they are tricking the body in a way. And that I remember being in acupuncture school 20 years ago where HRT, the Framingham Heart Study, that women's health revolution, really, that like women were being prescribed Premarin made from pregnant mare's urine and progestins, which contain these molecules that look a lot like progesterone, but aren't really what we naturally make, but with a little tweak. And women were developing strokes and heart attacks and getting cancer, certain kinds of cancers at higher rates. And so that really fell out of favor. And women, I think, understandably so, developed a fear of estrogen and fear of hormone replacement. And then there's all these different forms, right? That whether someone is trying to replace hormones with a pill or a patch or a pellet, or, like, is it a good thing to take a shot that prevents you from getting your period ever? That all of this sort of between birth control and sort of the HRT of 20 years ago versus options that are available now, and what's becoming more readily available, prescribable, and safe, it can be pretty confusing. So I'd love for you to just help sort out the differences between kind of bioidentical hormones, if that's even important, if the methods of delivery, what to be careful of, and what you think people should be doing to support themselves. Because I can imagine a lot of women out there saying, myself included, thinking like, okay, so I'm either going through menopause or past it. I don't want my heart to be stiff. I don't want to not have energy, right? I don't want my brain to suffer adverse effects. Like, how can I support myself, but safely?
Well, these are all the questions of the day that I am really addressing with my patients, and in large measure through articles and such that I'm trying to get out there, because there is so much misunderstanding. So it turns out that menopause, which is universal, no matter how great we are at exercising or good diets, eventually every woman gets into menopause, maybe a year one way or the other, but she's going to get there. So it's natural, it's universal, but that doesn't make it beneficial. So once the decision is made, okay, menopause is natural, but it's really not beneficial. It's really nature's way of turning us all into grandmas. And, we then have a secondary role, and then we'll live for a while. But, we're not going to be reproductive, and our organs are going to start to suffer. And, we just don't have the same level of optimal health that we used to have. Well, many of us don't like to just accept that. And we say, okay, so it's natural, but I really like all the health benefits of having hormones. So what do we do? Well, to me, since I take the big overview, I say it's not natural to have hormones in the menopause, but it's still good. And all of medicine is about trying to take things that are not going, say, the best way, and then trying to get them optimized, but doing it in a way that's most aligned with the way the body was designed to work. And so that's how I approach hormones. I want to replace the hormones in a way that the body is designed to have them in the body. So I want to achieve physiologic levels. Unfortunately, after the crazy, that's how I look at it, that whole crazy time 20 years ago when the Women's Health Initiative came out and everyone, got so frightened of hormones because of the misinformation and the using the wrong products and the wrong people and all kinds of things that were well-intentioned but didn't come out with good outcomes. So basically, that is the sort of the exact opposite of what you want to do, is everything that was being done in that study. And they came out because of so much fear. They said, if you have to use hormones for symptoms that are just completely intolerable, then use the tiniest doses for the shortest period of time. And so my philosophy is use the best dose. Like anything, you just want to use what's optimal, and you want to use what's physiologic, and then you want to maintain it forever. Because as long as you maintain hormones at a physiologic level, the cells, which don't know how old you are, will just do what they're designed to do. Once you recognize information is the whole point of having hormones, deliver messages to the cells so that the cells know what to do. And so I would always want to use what has been called bioidentical, but I actually renamed it in my recent paper, because bioidentical, a lot of people who are not in the world of sort of thinking along these terms, like they may be new to it, they have a lot of negative thinking. They think, oh, it's like unreliable, it's not good, or something that just has some negative vibes for some people. So bio, of course, is just like life form, and identical means the same. So I renamed it human identical, because it's not just bioidentical for any life form.
Yeah, let's get a little more specific here. We're talking about human
identical beings. Yeah, it's not horse identical. It's
right.
Human identical. And so I only want to use exact chemical makeup of human identical hormones, and I want to achieve optimal physiologic levels. And for a woman, that would be sort of like the mid-range for what her estrogen level would be when she's having a menstrual cycle, because right now we're giving static dosing as opposed to like rhythmic dosing. Right now, the state of the art isn't to mimic a menstrual cycle in its exact nature, although I think that is probably what we need to do some research on. And hopefully we will, because we always know the closer we get to nature, probably the better off the body will be. But for now, what I want to do is just look for a level of estrogen using estradiol, not some other form, estradiol, which is the estrogen made by the ovaries, to be at sort of the mid-range for a menstrual cycle. And then I want to pulse the progesterone to be 2 weeks out of each cycle, because that's what a woman does in a menstrual cycle. She doesn't make progesterone every single day at the same amount. To pulse it so that the first half, which is called the follicular phase, is just estrogen, and the second half, which is the luteal phase, is estrogen plus progesterone. And then guess what? A woman will likely have a period. And, they say, oh, no woman in menopause will put up with having periods again. They hate periods. And I say, reframe it, reframe how you think about it, and think about this is what our bodies were designed to have. So you have like 3 days or 4 days of a little bit of bleeding, you can deal with it because you're a strong woman. And in exchange, you're going to have the cells of your body have the information they need so that they can do their jobs optimally. So every organ, like you mentioned, like your brains, your bone, your gut, your heart, everything is going to work more similar to how they worked when you were optimally healthy, say in your mid-20s, than compared to the typical woman, say in her mid-70s. I mean, no one aspires to have the health of the average American woman who's 75. That's not usually our wish list, so why do we have to do that? We don't have to do that is the answer, but we have to try to give the environment of the body that is comparable as much as we can, knowing that we're not going to really be perfect, but at least a comparable, right, to what a woman would have in her body when she truly is the healthiest. We don't want to aim to be like an average older, unhealthy person. In fact, like for men, for example, they did a study of replacement of testosterone in men, and they gave it to the level of an average 19-year-old. And the men, without doing a darn thing, all improved cognitive function. They lost visceral fat. They put on lean body mass and muscle. I mean, your body does what it's supposed to do when it has the right hormones. And then if we can, obviously help it along by getting all the other stuff right, like exercise and sleep and nutrition and stress control, then we can stay remarkably healthy for decades into our menopausal years, which for some women could be fully half of their lives. So it's not like a little bit of time. Women live longer than men statistically, but women live with far more chronic disease than men, which is not always recognized. Right. Women have far more, everyone knows fractures related to osteoporosis, but they also have more joint replacements, more osteoarthritis, almost 3 times the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And women they die from heart attacks as much as men, and more, they have more hypertension than men. So it's a big deal getting old when you're a woman if you don't do all the right steps to optimize your health.
This episode is brought to you by brodywelch.com/cleanse. Over a year into this global pandemic, you are probably feeling a little less sparkly than you'd like. You might have let some comfort eating habits creep in that you are no longer excited about continuing. Maybe you're feeling tired, heavy, cloudy, achy, sluggish, not digesting well, not sleeping particularly well, craving sugar, craving caffeine, generally feeling blocked from optimal mental and physical energy. All of these could be signs of dampness hanging out in the body, and spring is a great time to ditch that stuff. I'm not talking about the kind of detox where you spend a ton of money on expensive random supplements that you think might help while feeling starved, spacey, resentful, and deprived. I'm talking about a 3-week process of streamlining and simplifying your nourishment. Week 1, you ditch the heavy stuff, remove the poor quality foods from your diet. Week 2, plant-based cleansing foods that are completely delicious. And week 3, you ease back into a new normal. You'll be supported with a 60-page recipe guide, grocery shopping lists, and group calls for community support. Not having to worry about what to eat for 3 solid weeks is its own form of simplification. You can check out the details at brodywelch.com/cleanse. Now back to the show. So I have a question for you that is of a personal nature. As my longtime listeners may know, I was an early adopter of menopause in my late 30s, and
I did not know.
I'm now 44, and what do you think? Should I be taking hormones? So, is it safe for me to start this up again if I'm several years out? And yeah, what do you think?
Well, I would say, if there's something that unless there's something I don't know, even you're just still within 10 years of when you went into menopause, correct? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely. Yeah. You qualify. And this is another big deal thing. The younger you are when you go through menopause, like the harder you fall. So, it's like the clock starts when you go through menopause in terms of a lot of the things that are involved with menopause. So sooner is better than later, but it's felt that, with what they call the timing hypothesis, that if you go too many years out, that your hormone receptors are offline and then you won't really get the benefits. I actually don't believe that, although I talked about that in my paper, because I can't go too far off, out of bounds from what is conventional thinking. I went very far as it was, but I couldn't quite go. But I'm going to bring that into my next paper. It's like, let's rethink this whole timing hypothesis thing, that you can't start hormones no matter how far a woman is out in menopause, because I use the vagina as my sort of example. You can give estrogen vaginally to a woman no matter how old she is, and you'll see improvement in vaginal health. And that's actually advocated by the menopausal societies, that no matter how old a woman is, she can benefit from vaginal estrogen. So what the heck? The vagina is not the most unique organ in the body. It's related to every other system. So if it can help the vagina, then I would make a reasonable assumption it can help every other organ too. So I personally think it's never too late, but always earlier is better.
Yeah. And of course, this is not medical advice, like for real. I know that I'm not really your patient, and anyone listening, we're not telling you what to do. This is an information only experiment, but it is like anything in health. There's always a cost benefit analysis, and hearing from someone who's gone deep with the science that, yeah, this is that, like, and it sounds like you're pretty clear that the benefits for all of the organ systems in our body far outweigh the risk.
Well, yeah, because I don't see a whole lot of risk.
That's what would be the risks.
Well, the biggest risk is that you may have some breast tenderness or irregular bleeding, because, we're not really look, women who are 25 sometimes or 30, they have irregular bleeding or they have a problem with their menstrual cycles. But so if we give hormones, certainly those things are possible. In terms of breast cancer, so hormones, if you give them bio or human identical hormones, they don't cause breast cancer. In fact, even from the Women's Health Initiative, when they gave Premarin, which is derived from pregnant horse urine, when they gave that alone without the progestin, this really toxic chemical that's called medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is an endocrine disruptor for progesterone that was given in that study. When you take that out of the equation and you just give the Premarin, the women actually had a lower incidence of breast cancer. Now, it's important to know that breast cancer in menopausal women isn't something that just pops up. It's probably found after it actually was begun, like 20 years later. So it's a slowly evolving cancer, and it's not caused by taking hormones when you take the bioidentical, human identical. But if you have breast cancer already, and it's already there, but you didn't know it, it's right. Possible that you could stimulate the growth, because estrogen is about growth and healing and proliferation. Like if you get a big cut on your skin, estrogen helps you to stop the bleeding. So when you have an injury, then estrogen upregulates the platelets to create clotting. It doesn't just do that randomly. It happens when you have like trauma.
When you need it, yes.
When you need it. And then it also creates new blood vessels, angiogenesis. It creates new tissue through different growth factors that are all promoted by estrogen. So it helps you to heal. So that gash in your skin, estrogen helps you to heal. And the skin even can make estrogen itself. It's so important. So estrogen is about healing and growth. And we did not evolve to have breast cancer. It's kind of a modern disease. And so we were not programmed to recognize it. And so when you have breast cancer, it's thought of, well, it's like damaged tissue, So estrogen to the rescue, right? It's going to heal it. So unfortunately, it's actually breast cancer. So estrogen, if you have breast cancer and then you give estrogen, there's a chance that it might promote growth or create new blood vessels to it, because it just thinks of it as damaged tissue that it's trying to heal and support. But of course, it's cancer. But that's a different thing. Causation is not what it does. It doesn't cause breast cancer. And in fact, if you're on hormones, and I would love to get more data and more studies, but my own hypothesis is that if you maintain a healthier lifestyle, lower toxic exposures, because it's the endocrine disruptors that are really responsible for the increase in premenopausal breast cancer in large measure. So if you can keep your endocrine disruptors to a minimum in terms of what's in your body, and you maintain proper nutrition and fitness and all the other things, and then you actually maintain hormones through the transition and into menopause, that you will lower your incidence of breast cancer. That's my hypothesis. And I would love to get some data, and studies going, because when you maintain estrogen, you reduce inflammation in the breast. And it's inflammation that ultimately is what is responsible for DNA breakage. And that's when cancer gets initiated. So if you can keep inflammation down, then you should reduce cancer incidence. And that's why cancer is now understood as a metabolic disorder, that it's related to inflammation, which underlies all of the metabolic disorders that we associate with aging.
That makes so much sense. I'd like to circle back to the role of testosterone. You mentioned that when you were talking about women's hormones, and I can imagine that maybe a few eyebrows arched at that point because we do think of testosterone as primarily a male hormone, and yet, of course, it does have a role to play in women's bodies. But what is that role?
Well, testosterone is about 1/10 the level in a female as in a male. So they're kind of flips. So we have far more estrogen than males, but males have estrogen, and we have far less testosterone, but we still have testosterone. So testosterone is made 50-50 in general. Half of it comes from our adrenal glands, from a little area called the zona reticularis that makes dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, so DHEAS, and that can be converted downstream into testosterone. And the ovaries make the other half. And of course, it's an anabolic steroid. So what that means is that it's about building things like building tissue, building muscle, building bone and ligaments. So it's about building up. And so, of course, we want it. And it also has receptors in the brain. And that also helps women to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more dominant. There's a condition that women have that now has turned into a condition that's not good when it becomes sort of like on the extreme level, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, where in its like ancient form, the women just made a little bit more testosterone than the average woman. And now we've had some data that women who win Olympic gold medals tend to be on the spectrum of making a little more testosterone than the average woman. Like maybe they're tending towards PCOS, but not the disease state PCOS, where they have like too much of that and everything kind of goes awry. But just in its like sort of natural state, like a normal variant of human femaleness, that they make a little bit more testosterone than the average woman. And they're like the winners. So we think that those are the women who had a little more testosterone, were like the leaders of the tribe. They were like the bold, the ones that went out and, like the explorer women, the dominant women, having that little extra testosterone. We know that women who don't have testosterone receptors, or they have like XXX, tend to be meeker and shyer. So a little testosterone goes a long way so that we speak our mind, so nobody's going to be a pushover if they have a little testosterone on board. So having some is great. Of course, having too much, everything's about balance, So
Indeed.
Women who have too much, that's a problem, then you're in trouble. So everything is about balance. But testosterone declines as we age, but differently than the menopause, where we lose our estrogen and progesterone. So it's made separately from making eggs, from having egg cells. And so the ovaries continue, and a lot of people don't realize this, the ovaries continue to make testosterone indefinitely, although with declining production as we age. And the adrenal gland continues to make testosterone, but also declining with age. And that's not really good. Everything kind of declines with age. But testosterone helps to maintain our brains to be sharp, our bones, our muscles, and sex drive. Of course, we don't want to forget that. It's involved definitely in that area as well. So testosterone is a hormone that has a lot of importance and function in women. Like there's no unimportant hormone. Every hormone is there for a purpose. And a lot of hormones are somewhat stable through age, some increase, and definitely testosterone, estrogen, progesterone in women definitely decrease. Of course, males often have a lot of testosterone decrease as well, which affects their metabolic health and brain health and so on as well. So testosterone is another hormone that I will replace in women, and I can measure it like I can just get a blood test and I can measure the testosterone level. And then we see the reference range. And then it's every woman's choice. It's like, well, here you are in the spectrum of testosterone levels. How do you feel? What do you want? Testosterone has no commercial product, so it can only be provided through a compounding pharmacy, which is totally legal and appropriate. And a little goes a long way in a woman. We don't give anywhere near the levels or doses like a male. But sometimes it can turn a woman around. Like suddenly she just feels more energetic, more motivated, more wanting to do exercise, more exercise stamina. So it can be a game changer in some women.
That makes a lot of sense, especially as I think about, yeah, those yang qualities of being assertive and that desire motivated to do things like libidinous, right? Like libido is about life, right? Like
Mm.
moving towards things, and wanting to be active. I could see that could be super beneficial for certain people out there. And so it there is sounds like this is personalized, that essentially like your goal is to get women into the like middle of the what would be a menstrual cycle range on these hormones.
Hmm.
And then so what's the process like? Is it like, blood tests, and then I mean, are you taking lots of different things? Is it an oral situation? Is it what's the method of delivery that is the best?
Well, of course, there are no studies comparing, one particular form or another because there's no one is motivated to do that or pay for that. So basically, what we have is a variety of products. Some are commercial, and then we also have compounded products that we can use as well. So it's definitely, like you said, going to be individualized. So in terms of commercial products that are human identical for estrogen, for estradiol, there are estrogen patches, and then there are gels. There's a couple of manufacturers that make estrogen gels, one that goes on the arms and one that goes on the thighs. And, so some people love one or the other, more or less. And, a patch you cannot completely hide if you have no clothes on because there's a patch,
Yeah.
and, if somebody wants something totally invisible, then you would want to use a gel because it just is gone. Now, if you are worried about transference, which is having the estrogen you put on go to a child or a pet or something like that, then the patch is perfect because it's not going to be transferred, because if you put some estrogen on your arms and then you give immediately a hug, well, it could potentially go from your arms onto the other individual or a pet, so there is that issue. If that's a concern, most people, like if you put it on your arms or your thigh, you're not going to be like necessarily touching another human or an animal in the near future, like a few hours go by and then you're fine. But just in case, that's something to consider. And in terms of compounded products, well, there are companies that make estrogen, and then it goes to the compounding pharmacy, and then they put it in the final delivery modality, whether it's a gel or a cream or a suppository. So they take the factory made, it's made by a pharmaceutical company, that's who makes the estrogen, but then they mix it in to some sort of delivery system that could be personalized to what a person likes, or if some people have allergies to some of the what could be in the commercial products, and they could make it with different products so that it doesn't have the same chemicals or whatever that was in a different product, so that for people who get a rash, there's always somebody out there that gets a rash to something, right?
Yes.
So, this way you can find something that works for the individual who is maybe hyperallergic. Also, if someone just does, needs a custom, like some people, no matter what, they can't buy shoes off the rack, they need a customized shoe size or something, like you have 2 feet, 2 different sizes, whatever, so sometimes things need to be customized to get what works for you, the dose or the format or the delivery system that works for you. And so that way, compounding gives us all those different options. And for testosterone, it has to be through a compounding pharmacy because there is no commercial product. And then for progesterone, most people will use a progesterone pill, whereas with estrogen, it should never be taken orally because it's converted in the liver from estradiol predominantly into estrone. which is a different form of estrogen, which works differently on the hormone receptors. So it really has a different effect. And the brain doesn't really like estrone. It only likes estradiol. So you're not going to get the brain benefits if you take oral estrogen at all the same as if you took it through the skin. We call it transdermally. So we don't want to do oral estrogen, but progesterone can be done orally or with a cream.
I really appreciate you unpacking that. Like, just it may seem like a mundane thing, but a lot of times it's like this can feel really overwhelming. And just knowing, for example, yeah, it doesn't, especially if gut health is compromised, how much sense does it make to be trying to digest a hormone? Like, when we're talking about wanting to mimic nature or be as close to nature as possible, it seems like that, yeah, like getting the correct form that is going to help the most organs of the body is pretty important. And just because you just mentioned the brain, what does estrogen do for the brain?
Oh, wonderful thing. So there are estrogen receptors all over the brain. So in the cerebral cortex, which is where you do a lot of your thinking, that is primarily, but not exclusively, the estrogen receptor beta. So it's one type. And then in the hypothalamus, where you create like all of your metabolic, like your autonomic nervous system is controlled through your hypothalamus and reproductive functions, and also the hippocampus where you put your memories, that's predominantly alpha. And so basically the entire autonomic nervous system has modulation due to estrogen, the thinking part of the brain, and also the immune system of the brain, which is often overlooked. So the immune system is like everywhere. And there are a type of immune cell, the white blood cell, called macrophages. And they're modified in different organs to do different things. And in the brain, they're called microglia and astrocytes, astroglia. So the microglia are sort of like the sentries of the brain. They're there on alert. They stay in sort of a natural resting state, sort of watching out, guarding for like invaders, bacteria, pathogens, damage, and then they go on alert, and then they go on the attack if the brain gets invaded or if there's damage, to gobble up the damaged tissue so that the brain can then repair, or to gobble up the pathogen, a virus or a bacteria that's getting in. And that is heavily regulated and modulated by estrogen. So, and the immune cells of the brain, the microglia, are also like weapons of mass destruction in that they contain these highly toxic enzymes. Now, these enzymes, when they're used under proper control, are what destroy and dissolve invading pathogens like bacteria and viruses. They also will dissolve damaged tissue if you had injury to the brain, so that it can be dissolved away and then get healed into that area of the brain. So you need to have these really important dissolving enzymes. But when you don't have enough estrogen in the brain to control those microglia, they become like little powder kegs, and they explode and start releasing. They become like super activated and release these really damaging enzymes in a completely uncontrolled fashion, creating harm. Because remember, these dissolve tissue, and they kill. So it can actually then damage your good, healthy brain. And so some of the theory of Alzheimer's is that without adequate estrogen, which remember, women have almost 3 times the incidence as males, you don't have the proper health of the vascular system. And so you get leaky arteries, and different invaders like bacteria and pathogens of different sorts and viruses get into the brain. So there's what's called the blood-brain barrier, and it becomes impaired or leaky. And then these organisms get into the brain, and then the immune system of the brain goes crazy. But instead of doing the proper thing to, get rid of them and then, clean up the damage and so on, the way it should happen normally, without enough estrogen, the whole system is like in great disarray. And the immune cells start dissolving not just the pathogens, but like everything in sight, including healthy brain tissue. And then the body is trying to heal it, but it can't do it properly. And then you get the amyloid beta deposited that has always been found to be associated with Alzheimer's, but getting rid of it doesn't fix Alzheimer's. Because it's not really fixing the underlying issue, which is a dysregulated immune system and impaired vascular system, so that you have this impaired the blood-brain barrier is letting everybody in, and then the immune system of the brain is dysregulated, so it's not properly controlling it. And then because you don't have enough estrogen, which is involved, like I mentioned, with healing and repairing, and that's what, that it's not doing it right. So you have a dysregulated system at every level, and hence you end up having the increased incidence of Alzheimer's. When they've done autopsies on brains of people who have Alzheimer's disease, they're finding high levels of all of these pathogens. I mean, they're finding all kinds of viruses in the brain and everything. So it clearly stuff is getting in there, and the immune system is not properly controlling it and or keeping it out in the first place through a healthy, intact vascular system. So it's so important to understand the role of estrogen in repairing the brain, maintaining the brain, and doing all the varied functions. And one more thing that's really important that's in the brain is what's called the master clock that regulates the circadian rhythm. And it turns out that estrogen has receptors on the master clock, which sits atop the optic nerve and can sense light and dark and to some degree nutrient status. And without enough estrogen, basically it drifts and you end up living like you're in a jet lag state for the rest of your life. So it's like, and we know that jet lag is not good for you. Like if you're jumping across time zones all the time, I mean, it's like every problem that you can imagine is exacerbated. And that's what happens when you don't have enough estrogen. It's like you're suddenly living a life of jet lag.
Well, that sounds like a compelling reason to consider this option, to consider the trade-off of having a few days of bleeding in exchange for brain health. Felice Gersh, I could talk to you all day, and I'm sure I would learn a ton, but I want to respect your time. So I'd love for you to just invite people to connect with you in the, where can people best find you online?
Well, my office website is integrative m. Well, that's my email. So it's
we'll put links in the show notes for sure.
So my office is my practice is in Irvine. So, and it's called Integrative Medical Group of Irvine, where I see patients all the time. I also do telemedicine. And I have an Instagram, which I'd love people to come and follow me on. It's Dr. Felice Gersh. And if you put that in, that'd be great. So I do my own little Instagram shows usually once a week. And I have my books, and you can find them on Amazon. I'm writing a book on menopause now. It should be done in just 2 months. So hopefully, you'll find that one as well. And I'm here. So I'm taking care of patients every day. That's my prime directive and my mission. So anyone who wants to can access me as a functioning doctor and follow me if they can't, get whatever wisdom they can get from my Instagram, and hopefully, we can all reconnect again.
Well, I so appreciate the work that you're doing in the world, and the fact that even with a busy practice, you have time to work on publishing articles that are changing the conversation about women's health, because it's really, just because it's common doesn't mean it's ideal. And I appreciate you advocating for us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a real pleasure, and I so appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit, and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.